Tonight's program is presented in partnership with the Lafayette Library and Learning Center's Glenn Seaborg Learning Consortium and is part of the Commonwealth Club's Good Lit series underwritten by the Bernard Osher Foundation. You can find the club on the internet at commonwealthclub.org. I'm Jonathan Curiel, journalist and author of All America, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our very special guest, Richard North Patterson, the author of 19 acclaimed novels, including The Spire and In the Name of Honor. Mr. Patterson has written a new work, The Devil's Light, which explores the idea of a nuclear threat from Al-Qaeda. What happens when Al-Qaeda steals a bomb and tries to detonate it on the 10th anniversary of 9/11? Mr. Patterson answers that in a thriller that features a lineup of interesting characters, including a U.S. intelligence figure named Brooke Chandler, who may or may not save the day. Mr. Patterson was a lawyer before becoming a writer, serving at one point as an assistant attorney general for the state of Ohio. He also worked as a lawyer with the Securities and Exchange Commission. He has been chairman of the organization Common Cause and has written for such publications as the Times of London and the Washington Post. Many of his works have been international bestsellers, and I dare say that The Devil's Light will join that list. Please welcome Richard North Patterson. It's great to see you and to have read your book. The Devil's Light doesn't refer to Osama Bin Laden's flashlight, but to the light emitted from a nuclear weapon. And this is a very serious subject, and people who know your career will not be surprised that you've tackled this subject. Your other books, for example, Eclipse was about human rights, Africa, and the geopolitics of oil, and your previous book, Exile, before that, was about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You are known for tackling serious issues and presenting them in a thriller format, and this novel is thrilling. But you have said that you didn't write this per se, although it is to entertain people. It's also to inform them. And in fact, you took 2 years to research this book. You interviewed a lot of high government officials and also went to the Middle East. And one of your main concerns is to let people know about the threat of Al-Qaeda. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, people worry about the Iranians or the North Koreans, but the Iranians, for example, as North Koreans, have a return address. And if they were to start a nuclear exchange, Israel could annihilate them quite easily. So the real threat, it seems to me, is from non-state actors. People that you can't find, people have an apocalyptic view of the world, people like Al-Qaeda who are dedicated to jihad. So the question becomes, at that point, how might they acquire a nuclear weapon? And this is what keeps our national security and counterterrorism people up nights. You have to look at first where they would do it. They've tried in a variety of ways. Osama bin Laden met with a Pakistani scientist and nuclear engineer shortly before 9/11, drawing up specifications for a potential Al-Qaeda bomb. He's tried to get stolen Soviet weapons from the Chechens. He tried to get highly enriched uranium in South Africa. But Pakistan has always been his focus, and there's a reason it's the most dangerous place on earth. It's the 5th largest nuclear power. They have up to 110 nuclear weapons, it's estimated. They have more terrorist groups per square mile than any other place you can find in that region. As we might suspect from the fact that bin Laden hid there in plain sight for a number of years. Their security service, the ISI, has close ties to former and current jihadists. They helped fund and start the Taliban to fight the Russians back in Afghanistan. They funded and started LET, the people who did the Mumbai attacks in India, as a counterweight to Indian military power. All those groups have operational connections to each other now, and experts believe that they would be, and they are inclined to plan operations against the West, both at home and abroad. So the question becomes then, How vulnerable is the Pakistani arsenal, and how might someone get a nuclear bomb? Well, there's several ways. You could have a rogue officer taking over a facility. You could have the clandestine sale of materials, which A.Q. Khan, the father of their nuclear program in Pakistan, did for a number of years. You could have a rogue officer taking over a nuclear installation, or you could have my scenario, where a bomb in transit from its secured facility to the front lines in a nuclear alert to India is stolen, because that's where it's most vulnerable. So anyhow, you have a combination of weapons, a country which is hostile, a security service which has ties to jihadists, and a lot of jihadists who have been indulged by the establishment, military and security, and you have something that is really a worry. And nuclear terrorism, I would suggest, is one of the great national security fears that we have.
And in your book, The Devil's Light, you have Osama Bin Laden is a character in the book. And at one point, without giving too much away, he issues a pronouncement that essentially says to the United States, we are going to bomb your country with this stolen weapon. There's a lot more to that, and a lot more. But can you talk about putting Osama Bin Laden in the book, and why it was important to do that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's really sad when one of your characters dies and all Americans do is applaud, you know. It's, imagine my surprise. But what I did was I have scenes of Bin Laden in 2009 and 2010 planning this nuclear operation with a fictional operative named Almer al-Zaror. It was really important, I thought, to have Bin Laden involved in this plot, because he would be. He was still, as we know now, in operational control or in operational touch with other al-Qaeda folks around the world. And one of his geniuses, if you will, is there are roughly 60 countries that have al-Qaeda cells, which he's built up. And he was organizationally brilliant that way. He was also, if you were of that peculiar mindset, an inspiring figure. So in any event, as he is the one who's been obsessed with nuclear weapons, as he is the one who issued a fatwa against the West calling for the use of nuclear weapons, he's pledged the death of 4 million Americans. Well, how do you do that? Certainly not one at a time. It seemed to me that he was essential to the plot and essential to the story. So the question is, how do you depict somebody who is very well known and yet is not well known, and who you, of course, can't interview? And what I did do is I talked extensively to Peter Bergen, who was the last Western journalist to meet with Bin Laden, talked to numerous people in our intelligence community, and tried to get a pretty good sense of what it would be like to actually be in his presence. And those scenes, you know, are as realistic as I could make them. The other point that I'd make briefly is that everyone I talk to who have done psychological studies of al-Qaeda principles argue, A, they're quite well educated for the most part, and they are, by the standards of an MMPI, not insane at all. They're not psychotic. That actually makes them more scary. They're perfectly rational people pursuing an utterly horrible and irrational goal. You know, if they were, you know, barking mad, it would be easier to deal with, but the fact is that they're not.
Yeah, they're not, and the characters in your book, the CIA operatives, Brooke Chandler, they're aware that they are not irrational people.
Yeah.
And your book, in a sense, sets up polar opposites in terms of where they live and their philosophies, but not in terms of their maniacal, say, interest. And for example, Brooke Chandler, the CIA operative, I don't know who exactly that might be modeled after, and any number of people, but he tries to go after or find the nuclear weapon, and may or may not be successful, as we don't want to give away the ending. But can you talk about how much of the real life of the CIA operatives are in the book, and whether that played a part, or whether you had to kind of Hollywoodize it?
Oh no, I mean, if I had to Hollywoodize it, I really wouldn't do it. I just think that this stuff is too important to be, fooling around with things that way. So, no, I interviewed CIA undercover agents, past and present, to get a sense of their lives and how they think and what they would do. I had hours and hours and hours and hours, several meetings with two people who were remarkably helpful. One, Bob Baer, a former CIA agent, field agent, who was portrayed by George Clooney in Syriana, kind of fictionalized a version of